Oh, overshot. Good evening. Hello all of you little demons, Jules here for WhatCulture.com, back again with another episode of the awesomely named and awfully hosted Choose Your Own Adventure, the weekly medieval themed format where I, the crown jewels of WhatCulture.com, take a list chosen by you. Yes, you, the person who drank 2 triple strength coffees over the weekend and gave themselves heart palpitations. Yes, you get to decide what list I dole out to you each and every week. And this week we have none other than Taco Boy 2002, keeping it real since 2002, to thank for their suggestion of video game developers or programmers who ended up hating their own creation. Now, it's actually very easy to hate the things that we end up creating. Just ask my parents or any of my Warhammer projects that you guys keep pointing out are over here. I'm working on some orc knobs. Hilarious name. Before I'm going to butcher them to pieces and probably put them on the table and realise that I hate them, even though I spent hour upon hour trying to paint their little booties. Anyway, besides the point, video games, they are labours of love, intense passion projects that take a lot of time. And along the way, it can be a very bumpy ride. So of course, by the end, you might end up having a thing that doesn't really resemble either what you wanted it to originally, or you just downright hate it thanks to publisher meddling. So let's take a look today at some video game developers who really hated their own video games by the end of things. With this in mind, I'm Jules, this is WhatCulture.com, and these are 8 video game creators who ended up hating their own projects. And you know the drill by now. Say hi to me here in the live chat, and also drop your suggestions for next week's episode down in the comment section below. But until then, my friends, well, let's get on with the list, shall we? Number 8, Dong Nguyen, Flappy Bird. So you remember that scene in Star Wars where Alderaan gets destroyed and Old Man Kenobi goes, "Oh, by gum, I've got a right headache from all these people crying out in anger. Oh, thank God that's passed. Oh, can we get on with our day? I'm pretty sure if I go down Chippy, I'll get the early bird supper." I might be misremembering it a little bit there. But that's basically what happened when Flappy Bird hit the mobile game market way back in 2013. The game was making money hand over fist, but it was equally amassing a huge amount of ire from online communities who became enraged that such a simple game was so bloody hard. Clearly they'd never played that chopper browser game that we all played as cool kids back in the 90s, because that still gives me Vietnam War flashbacks. Yet I digress. Dong Nguyen, the creator of this slice of gaming sadism, soon became inundated with complaints, personal harassment, and even death threats over Flappy Bird. And so, despite its rampant success, he pulled the game from sale and retired from the public eye. To hate your game and kill it off is one thing, but to kill your game off because it was too popular, well, that's another thing entirely. Number 7, George Fan, Plants vs. Zombies. Now, sometimes a developer can hate a project because of how it's perceived by the public, but as in the case of George Fan, he saw something that he'd spent so much time and poured so much of his love into be completely destroyed by the industry itself, as they turned Plants vs. Zombies from a very cute strategy game into something of avarice and greed. Plants vs. Zombies sold incredibly well upon its release, so much so that PopCap Games began pushing it as their flagship IP, but with this fresh blood in the water, it soon attracted that big old shark known as EA. Now, EA was on a run of snapping up smaller developers to add to its own lineup and soon devoured the franchise. And much like nearly every other game that they've got their sweaty dicks on, they stuffed it full of microtransactions in order to maximize its long-term profitability. Profitability. Sounds like the start to a really Prodigy song, doesn't it? Profitability. I'm not going to give this one the music interlude. No, Osley, I'm not. Stop trying to force me to make this the weekly musical interlude. I know it would have been an absolute banger if I'd carried it on, but that's up to the public to make into a remix. Now, for George Fan, this wasn't the type of brain-numbing zombie that he had intended upon making with this game, and in an interview with VentureBeat, he even told of all of the sickening ways that EA had changed the mechanics of the game, and that it simply wasn't fun because they were just trying instead to hook people, and indeed hook up, to their wallets. He said that the way that the game ended up running was in such a way that didn't even allow players to have even a modicum of fun. EA, seeing these comments, decided to do an incredibly EA thing. They fired him. Yes, that's right. EA crushing the life, hope and spirit out of the populace ever since, I don't know, way back they were coughed out of Beelzebub's ballsack. Number 6, Peter Molyneux. All of the Fable franchise. Oh, Peter, what the hell are we going to do with you, man? I seriously, genuinely think that this man should stop making video games and instead just become some MC frontman or hype man for like a garage act in London, because this guy can get anyone over with his gift of the gab. He's got a silver tongue. But the problem is that 9 times out of 10, his bark is definitely much more worse than his bite, and he ends up looking like a pedigreed chump all the bloody time. The most shocking thing about this almost Machiavellian villain mouthpiece is how he derides all of his previous works, especially in the Fable series, in order to hype up the next installment of said series. After he promised that he'd revolutionize video game combat with just one button, he then called Fable 2 rubbish while on the marketing train for Fable 3. And when that game came out, he said it was disappointing when trying to give a boost to his next project. This man is truly one of a kind, and not in a good way. He ends up hating his own games by hyping up the ones that are coming after it, and that's really bad. You shouldn't hate your work just because it's not the new thing that's going on at the moment. And he ends up crafting this image where he becomes this Del Boy weekend market trader who slaps on a fake moustache and pretends that he doesn't speak English when you come waving a receipt looking for a refund. Sorry, I don't speak English. Peter Molyneux. Which actually gives me an idea for this week's musical interlude, an ode to Peter Molyneux. And for those fans who remember when I debuted back on the channel in 2016, you may actually remember this because I'm resurrecting an old classic today of my spoken word poetry slam session on Peter Molyneux. So Owsley, are you ready to travel back in time?
Travel back in time? But we're going to miss Bake Off?
James, how old are you again? Like 3?
Yep, I'm 6 years old, Jules.
You wouldn't have even been born back in 2016.
I was born in 2017, why not?
Your pube? Get your bass out. No, I mean literally get it out because you won't need it. In fact, put Jazz on. Jazz can do this bit for you.
What?
So here we are, my resurrected rendition to one Peter Molyneux. Peter Molyneux promises the world to you, but he can't deliver it because he always spouts shit. Number 5, Leslie Benzies, GTA 5. Now, it might actually be impossible to imagine working on the Grand Theft Auto franchise and having a bad time, because, I mean, when you consider all of the crazy stuff that goes on in these games, the amount of resources and man-hours that's poured into them, I mean, it's hard not to see it as just sort of this virtual playground. But it does seem that behind the code there were some pretty dodgy goings on, and instead of the dunce hats and the sort of foul-mouthed 12-year-olds who'll tell you all these new sexual positions that seem pretty scary and you really don't think that you can convince your girlfriend to do them, I'm really getting off topic here. Leslie Benzies had a bad time. Mr. Benzies had been with Rockstar North for years, even as far back as Space Station Silicon Valley, where the dev team was known as DMA. And over the years, he'd worked his way up to become one of the prime members of the group and contributed heavily to GTA 5's online mode, which, according to Benzies, the other partners really weren't that interested in. Now, bear in mind that GTA Online rakes in silly money each and every day, so that achievement was no small feat. Yet Benzies claimed that he was pressured into taking a sabbatical from the higher-ups and then not compensated at all for his work on the online mode. Now, it seems pretty fair to ask for a payday, right? Well, of course, that's not how it ended, as while Benzies was seeking his $150 million compensation, he was hit by a countersue from his former team, claiming that his actions, demands, and attitude during the development were the real reason that he was let go, and thus was not entitled to the money that he was asking for. They then provided photographic evidence of Benzies in a strip club and in sort of compromising sexual situations as evidence for this sort of claim. It's all very GTA, isn't it? You've got this person who's seeking a large amount of money, then they've got all of these other countersues and all of these like blackmail and bribery sort of thing going on. It's very strange indeed, but Benzies did walk away with his compensation and used that to set up his own couple of companies. So that's good in a very roundabout bad way. Long story short, he probably doesn't think back on his time in GTA 5 fondly. Number 4, Phil Fish, Fez, and kind of Twitter as well. Phil Fish, what a guy. I mean, no matter what you think of the man, you can't deny that his story of getting Fez actually to the marketplace was anything less than utterly mesmerizing. If you've never watched Indie Game the Movie, then I heavily suggest you do so, because it's brilliant. It's a brutal watch, but it is brilliant. In this film, they showcase the trials and tribulations that Fish and several other devs faced in getting their titles out there, but many found that his tale in particular to be of great interest, as it showcased a man so determined that it borderlined on the dangerous. His outbursts throughout the piece are from a man who was desperate to succeed, and though that is exactly what he ended up doing, launching Fez to near universal acclaim, he did showcase a chip on his shoulder that was in danger of being burned to cinders from Fish's seemingly inability to keep a cool head. Shot after shot was fired on Twitter at those denouncing him or the game in any form, and after a particularly heated exchange on the social media site, he'd had enough. So Fish grabbed his ball, or in this case, the tiny little red cubes, and took everything home with him, cancelling Fez 2 in the process. And indeed, he did have a long stint where there wasn't any social media activity from the man, but he has made a slight return to the gaming industry. He developed a VR title recently, and then has been working on a few other indie games as sort of like a partner in them, but there is no sign of Fez 2 ever being back on the menu, which is just sad. Like, whatever you think of the man, the game was great. I want to see more of it. Well. Number 3, Steve Escalante, Afro Samurai 2, Revenge of Kuma. Now, a developer calling a game a failure is one thing, but removing said game from all storefronts and basically all of existence, well, that's entirely another one. Such is the case of Afro Samurai 2 Revenge of Kuma, the follow-up to the admittedly pretty decent hack-and-slash Afro Samurai game, which, if I'm being honest, after witnessing the game firsthand and being a huge fan of the animated series, was an unmitigated disaster. Now, not to get too much into it, but the combat felt like you were fighting off 20 sleeping pills all at once, and the story was so convoluted and messy, it was like trying to ask a 5-year-old for their description of War and Peace. And despite being cel-shaded and overtly stylized, this game somehow looked much worse than the original. That, at least, should have been a home run, right? Well, critics the world over lambasted this game, and to be honest, if things had stayed as such, then this title would have just faded into obscurity. But then for some reason, Steve Escalante decided to do a series of interviews in which he told the press and the world that they had removed this game from sale across every single platform possible. You can't get this game. It's a very weird move, Steve. I mean, we would have just been like, yeah, it's just a bad game, right, move on. Let's talk about Ride to Hell Retribution for the 15th time, because that's definitely worse. This was akin to not just falling on your own sword, but instead actually pushing yourself down, slowly down the blade, and there's like a little humble pie at the bottom with an egg on top, and you end up with humble pie and egg on your face, and you just slide it down there, and as you gurgle into the mass of like pastry and filling, you just go, nothing to see here, move on. But he got like an air horn as well, so like, of course I'm going to look at that. Why would I not look at that? That's a man with a sword and a pie. And an air horn. Number 2, Richard Applin, Final Fight. My lasting memory of Final Fight is of pure hatred. Those are the words of Richard Applin, probably not his voice when I think about it, when he came to describe his time working on the pretty much universally acclaimed street 'em up, beat 'em up Final Fight. And when you hear that, you've got to think to yourself, oh, poor man, what happened to him? Did something terrible happen during his development? Well, no. Turns out that the reason for this game about slapping more meat than a BDSM butcher that caused him so much distress was because he found the thing to be so boring. I'm sorry, are we even playing the same game here? Are you telling me that playing as a jacked up, primo porn-tashed man body slamming some punk into the ground, who also happens to be the mayor of the city that you're fighting in, is boring? It makes me question what old Richie was up to on the weekends for this to be boring to him. Was it like orgies, drinks, mixers, I don't know, drinking mercury? I don't know, I've got no point of reference because clearly this is beyond me. At number 1, Jim Bagley, Doom on the Sega Saturn. And so we end with a tale, not of a developer who had the life crushed out of him by a publisher or the industry itself, or indeed fans turning on a game and just saying, no, we hate this, and making the developer hate it themselves, but instead of a man who just wanted to do the best work that he could, but was unfortunately hampered by the original game's designer. That man was Jim Bagley, who was tasked with bringing the all-time classic Doom to the Sega Saturn. Now, thanks to his expertise with the system, Bagley was able to come up with some code that let the game run at 60 frames per second and look far superior to the original PC version. I mean, that sounds like an absolute winner, right? I mean, you've got the original game, which is just like, just generate a Doom image here, just be like, yeah, so it's not that bright, but it's pretty bright. And then on the other side, you've got this version, the Sega Saturn, that Jim Bagley's made, and I want Slime Jesus come down, bless it, just popping down. He's blessed it. Now look at this. Well, not according to John Cormack, who had developed the original game, who told Bagley to take his nice new workaround and shove it right up his Slayer pipe. Cormack didn't want any custom code in the game and ordered Bagley to use an inferior processing method which stripped the Saturn of its smooth frame rate and, according to Bagley, resulted in the slow, janky mess that I still cringe about to this day. Poor old Bagley, eh? This one's for you. And there we go, my friends. Those were 8 video game creators who ended up hating their own projects. I hope that you enjoyed that, and please let me know what you thought about it down in the comments section below, as well as your suggestions for next week's episode. I'd love to see your suggestions, my friend. And if you want to follow me further and have a little chat ski, you can do so over on Twitter at RetroJ with a 0, or you can swing by Live and Let's Dice. It's where me and my friends play lots of board games and video games. We do Blood Bowl streaming on Tuesday. We do Fallout New Vegas on a Wednesday, D&D on a Sunday. Come join us. There's something for everyone over there. It's a good laugh. But before I go, my friends, I just want to say one thing. We detailed today a lot about video game developers who ended up hating their own projects. And you know what? Sometimes we can do that to ourselves. We can end up just hating ourselves for no fault of our own and blaming ourselves for mistakes that we made in the past or things that just aren't going as well as we want them to. But I promise you, things will get better if you just allow yourself a little bit of space from the thing that's causing you so much stress. If you can take a step back and gain that perspective, you'll be able to do things in much better ways. You'll be able to approach situations with more energy. You'll be able to ask for help if you need them, and it will make you live a healthier and happier life in the long run if you're able to do that. So please don't beat yourself up and just be bloody kind to yourself. Why? Because you're a massive ledge. You're a massive ledge. Got to keep saying it though, especially when the nights are getting cold and the days are short. Messes with your head, doesn't it? But treat yourself with love, because I love you. Anyway, as always, I've been Jules. You have been awesome. Never forget that. And I'll speak to you soon, all right? Take care of yourself. Bye.